Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
He handed me back my car keys with that same crooked grin he'd been getting away with since we were kids, the one that used to charm teachers, get him out of speeding tickets, and make our mom believe every lie he ever told. I remember that look clear as day, because in that moment, something in my gut twisted. Not quite anger, not suspicion just yet, more like the feeling you get when you know someone's full of it, but you can't prove it yet. He tossed the keys onto the counter, stretched his arms, and asked what was for dinner like he hadn't just borrowed my car for nearly 4 hours longer than he said he would. I asked him straight up if everything was okay with it, no dents, no issues, nothing weird I should know about. He didn't even flinch. "Jess, come on," he said with a laugh, like I was being ridiculous. "It's fine. Drives like a dream." "Why? You don't trust me now?" And I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep peace in a family that doesn't know how to talk about anything real without turning it into a guilt trip. I remember thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, he was my brother. Yeah, he made some dumb decisions, sure, and yeah, he'd been skating by on charm and apologies his whole life, but he was still my blood. But it only took 4 days for that shaky trust to come crashing down. I got a voicemail from my insurance agent on a Tuesday morning, just as I was heading into a property showing. Her voice was calm, professional, but what she said hit me like a punch to the chest. She said they received notice that my car had been involved in a hit and run over the weekend. She asked if I was okay, said I might want to file a claim soon, and that someone from the claims department would follow up for a statement. I remember standing in the parking lot of that house, the key still in my hand, the front door just a few steps away, and feeling the kind of stillness that only comes right before everything you've built starts to shake. I didn't go into the showing. I called Ryan instead. He didn't answer. I texted him, "Call me. Now." 15 minutes later, my phone rang. His voice was casual, like nothing was wrong. "What's up, sis?" I didn't dance around it. "Did you hit something in my car this weekend?" Silence. Just for a second too long. Then, what? "No. Why would you even say that?" I told him about the voicemail. The insurance company. The word hit and run. And he laughed, actually laughed, and said something like, "You seriously believe that crap? You know how these companies are, they screw up all the time." The more he talked, the angrier I got, not because of what he said, but because of how damn confident he was that I'd buy it. That I'd just nod and let it go like I always used to. He flipped it on me, said maybe I forgot that I drove it last Friday. That maybe I hit something and just didn't notice. Can you believe that? I let him borrow the car, and now he was trying to plant the idea in my head that maybe I was the one who screwed up. I should have seen it then for what it was, gaslighting, plain and simple. But when you've spent your life being the understanding sibling, you hesitate to call it what it is. You second guess. You wonder if you're being dramatic. So I told him I'd look into it, and he said, "Yeah, do that," like it was nothing. But I didn't just look into it. I started digging. And not long after, I found something that made my blood run cold. There's this local Facebook group for our neighborhood, mostly people complaining about potholes, lost pets, and porch pirates. But that day, buried deep in a thread about reckless drivers, someone had posted a blurry photo from the parking lot of a grocery store. It showed a sedan, metallic gray, the same model and year as mine, with a massive dent in the front right bumper. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. Lots of people have the same car. But then I zoomed in. The license plate wasn't fully visible, but you could make out the first 3 letters. They matched mine. And standing beside the car, with his arm resting on the hood like he owned the damn thing, was Ryan. The caption read, "Whoever owns this car, you hit a parked vehicle and drove off." Cameras caught it. Hope karma catches up. Right then, everything clicked. The cocky attitude. The sudden defensiveness. The half-second pause before he denied it. He didn't just hit something, he ran. And he knew damn well what he'd done. I stared at that photo for a long time. I felt this mixture of betrayal and fury boiling in me, not just because of the accident, but because he looked fine in that picture. Relaxed. Like it didn't even register that he might have hurt someone. Like he figured no one would trace it back to him, or worse, he figured if they did, I'd take the hit for him. Like always. And you know what? For a second, I almost did. Because that's what being the good sibling does to you. It wires you to protect people, even when they're screwing you over. But something shifted in me that day. I stopped asking if I was overreacting. I stopped wondering if I owed him anything. And I started planning. Because if Ryan wanted to lie to my face, drag my name into some mess he created, and expect me to play the quiet, loyal sister, I was going to let him. At least, that's what he'd believe. Until the day the lawsuit landed in his mailbox. And saw my name on it. Not as the driver, but as the witness. The one who handed them everything they needed to take him down. When I tell people that my brother has always had a certain way with words, I don't mean he was poetic or thoughtful or even particularly articulate. What I mean is that he mastered, long before I did, the art of saying just enough of the right things to make people stop asking the wrong questions, and it's that slick, casual kind of manipulation that lets a man lie with a straight face and still get invited to Thanksgiving dinner by the very people he's spent years disappointing. And for most of my life, I was just like everyone else, willing to explain away his bad habits, willing to forgive before he asked, and willing to carry the weight of his mistakes just to avoid the awkward silence that followed when I didn't. After I saw that photo online, with my car dented and parked all wrong beside some crushed shopping carts, and my brother just leaning on the hood like nothing had happened, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that he wasn't just lying to me. He was counting on me to lie to everyone else, and that was the part that really stuck in my throat like a splinter I couldn't swallow. I tried to sleep that night, but I kept picturing that smirk of his, that relaxed posture, and the fact that he didn't even try to hide it. It wasn't guilt I saw in that photo, it was arrogance. Like he believed, deep down, that I'd cover for him just like I always had. The next morning, I called him. Not because I wanted to argue or accuse, I already knew better than to come at him directly, because Ryan didn't respond to confrontation with apologies. He responded with deflection, guilt trips, and just enough charm to confuse the issue until you started doubting yourself instead of him. He answered on the second ring, and his voice was already playing defense, which told me everything I needed to know. Hey, Jess. Look, I talked to a buddy of mine who works insurance, and he says these mistakes happen all the time. It's probably just someone misreporting a plate or something. Seriously, don't stress. I'll help you handle it. I didn't respond right away. I just listened. Let him dig himself deeper. He kept going, kept talking about how we needed to get ahead of this, how we should maybe tell the insurance company that the car was parked somewhere else that night, how we should probably not mention that he'd driven it, just to avoid complications. And the more he talked, the more I felt this heavy, sharp realization settle in my chest. He wasn't just hoping I'd cover for him, he fully expected it. He expected me to bend the story around his screw-up like I had before, because in his mind, that's what sisters do. They protect. They clean up. They don't ask too many questions, and they certainly don't go running to the law. He wrapped it all up with a line that made my skin crawl, said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Come on, Jess. Families gotta stick together. I don't remember exactly what I said back, something vague, something neutral, probably a version of let me see what I can do, because I knew if I gave him the truth right then, if I showed even a sliver of the anger building inside me, he'd go into damage control and start laying down landmines. So instead, I told him I'd call the insurance company and handle it, and he thanked me like I was doing him a favor, like I was saving him from some tragic injustice instead of shielding him from consequences he fully deserved. Later that day, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone in my hand, staring at a blank notepad and wondering how deep this hole really went. I started making calls, not to the insurance company just yet, but to a friend of mine from college, Chloe, who went into law and never quite lost that sharp, ruthless edge she had even when we were 20 and broke. I told her everything, what I knew, what I suspected, what I was planning. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. When I was done, she just said, "You've got more than enough to hang him with. The question is, do you want to?" And I didn't answer her right away, because I was still caught between this old version of myself that believed in forgiveness and the woman sitting at that table who was so tired of watching someone she loved walk away clean while she paid the price in stress, guilt, and sleepless nights. I told her I'd think about it. She said, "Just don't wait too long. If he drags you into this, you could be liable too." That night, Ryan showed up at my place again. No call. No warning. Just walked in like he still had keys to every part of my life. He said he wanted to talk, but what he really wanted was reassurance. He flopped onto the couch, kicked off his shoes, and started telling me some story about how work was slow and money was tight and things had just been rough lately, and it took me a few minutes to realize he wasn't apologizing. He was setting up an excuse, preloading a reason for why what happened wasn't really his fault. He said something like, "I know I've been a pain lately, but I'm trying, Jess. I swear. I just need a little time." And as I watched him, sprawled out like he owned the place, sipping from the bottle of beer he pulled from my fridge without asking, I thought about all the times I had looked the other way. All the times I had explained his behavior to people who warned me, excused his temper to friends who saw through him, and smiled through clenched teeth during family dinners while he made jokes at my expense just to keep the spotlight off his own disasters. I nodded along, said nothing too committal, and when he left, I locked the door behind him and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was finally starting to close the door on more than just that visit. Because Ryan's lie wasn't just about a dented car and a messed-up bumper, it was a slow, steady erosion of trust that had been happening for years, and the only difference now was that I finally had proof. He wanted me to keep playing the same old role, but I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't going to protect him. But I'd let him think I would. For now. In the days that followed, I became someone I barely recognized, methodical, calculating, and quiet, the kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface like a coiled spring, tension building with every step closer to the truth. And not the kind of truth you find in words or confessions, but the kind that hides in records, footage, patterns of behavior, and the subtle indifference in someone's voice when they think they've already gotten away with it. I didn't confront Ryan again. I didn't question him or accuse him or even mention the hit and run. I simply smiled when he called, nodded when he talked, and told him I was working on it, as if I were still the same gullible sister who used to bail him out of trouble before he even had the nerve to ask. But while he played the role of the misunderstood sibling, pacing his apartment on the phone with me, spinning stories about how he was being unfairly blamed, how the whole thing was just a mess of bad timing, I was digging. And what I found didn't just confirm my suspicions. It lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. The first thing I did was ask Chloe, my lawyer friend, the only person I trusted to understand what I was really dealing with without trying to steer me back toward forgiveness or some vague notion of family comes first, to run a few checks. I gave her Ryan's full name, date of birth, and the last known address he'd used when applying for credit, which I only had because I'd once co-signed for a furniture lease he never finished paying off. She didn't ask why. She just said she'd get back to me in a couple of days. I think she sensed the shift in my voice, the stillness I'd adopted, and understood that this wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about history. While she did that, I installed a GPS tracker on my car, not because I didn't trust him to return it, but because I wanted to know where he went when he thought no one was watching. I also set up a dash cam, the kind that activates even when the engine's off, and keeps a record not just of what's in front of the car, but what happens inside it. And I didn't tell him. Of course I didn't. I let him borrow the car again, because yes, after everything, he had the audacity to ask for it, and I handed over the keys like I had no idea what he was capable of. He drove off around noon that Saturday, and I watched the car disappear from the street with this strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie where I already knew the ending, and yet still couldn't stop watching to see exactly how it would unfold. I spent the day half distracted, waiting for the data to upload, refreshing the GPS feed every hour or so, and each time I saw the little red dot move further across the map, I wondered if this was how it had always been, me giving, him taking, and me pretending I wasn't bothered by it, all while resenting him in silence. When the footage came through that night, I watched all of it. Every minute. The stops, the way he drove, the calls he made on speakerphone while cruising through parts of town he had no business being in. He wasn't running errands. He wasn't helping a friend. He was meeting someone in a parking lot behind a rundown liquor store, and whatever they exchanged wasn't groceries. I couldn't see faces clearly, but I didn't need to. The way he looked around before opening the trunk, the way he stuffed something into his backpack and peeled off like he was being chased, it told me more than I ever wanted to know. He was using my car for more than just reckless driving. He was involving me, knowingly or not, in whatever side business he'd picked up this time, and that changed everything. The next morning, Chloe called. Her voice was low, professional, with that edge she always had when she was about to say something important. She told me Ryan's license had been suspended 6 months ago, not for a simple parking violation or unpaid ticket, but for failure to appear in court after a prior traffic incident, an incident where he'd rear-ended a delivery truck and fled the scene. And the only reason he didn't face charges then was because the vehicle wasn't properly identified. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, staring out the window at the quiet street, trying to process what she was telling me. This wasn't new. This wasn't an isolated event. It was a pattern. A calculated one. He had been doing this for years, avoiding responsibility, skipping consequences, and using the people around him as buffers to absorb the fallout. Chloe told me that if the current victim of the hit-and-run pursued legal action, and if it was discovered that Ryan had been driving under a suspended license in a vehicle registered to someone else, me, I could be held liable in civil court, even if I wasn't behind the wheel. Especially if I failed to disclose that he wasn't insured to drive the car. It hit me then, not just as a possibility, but as a certainty. If I didn't act, if I didn't step in and expose him, I wasn't just putting my own finances and reputation at risk. I was setting myself up to become another casualty of Ryan's mess, just one more name on the long list of people he'd burned. So I made a choice. I called the victim's lawyer, yes, the elderly couple who were hit, and asked for a meeting. I told them I had information that might help their case. I didn't go into detail. I didn't admit anything over the phone. I just said I had evidence, and I was willing to share it. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, someplace quiet. I brought copies of the GPS data, stills from the dash cam, and a written statement documenting the dates and times he used the car. I told them everything I could without making it about revenge, and they thanked me, their hands shaking slightly as they took the folder. Walking back to my car, I felt the strangest thing, not guilt, not triumph, not fear, but relief. Not because it was over, but because I finally understood that the only way to stop someone like Ryan was to stop protecting him. And I knew what I had to do next. I had to let him believe that I was still on his side. Because sometimes, the best way to bring someone down isn't by yelling or fighting or throwing punches, it's by holding the door open just long enough for them to walk straight into the consequence they've been running from their entire life. There's a moment, right before someone steps into the trap you've laid for them, where you have to pretend everything is fine, where your smile has to be just soft enough, your tone just light enough. Your words so perfectly neutral that the other person never even thinks to look down and check the ground beneath their feet, and that's the moment I lived in for the next several days. Walking that careful line between the sister he thought he still had and the woman I had finally decided to become. And the strange part wasn't how good I became at lying, or how easy it was to act like I wasn't furious, disgusted, and maybe even a little heartbroken. It was how naturally the role came to me, how I could laugh at his jokes, nod at his plans, and play along with this unspoken agreement that everything would be okay, even though I had already placed every piece of the noose he was about to step into. By then, Ryan had started to believe he was in the clear. He stopped calling me in a panic, stopped spinning his rehearsed stories about insurance errors and clerical mix-ups, and instead started talking like a man who had already rewritten the ending of the story in his own favor. He even joked, over cheap takeout one night at my kitchen table, that he was glad I handled it, like the entire hit and run had been a minor inconvenience I'd graciously cleared off his plate, and not a serious legal offense he had actively tried to blame on me. He leaned back in his chair, sipping a beer like he hadn't a care in the world, and said something like, "I knew you wouldn't let this become a big deal," and I just smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course not, Ryan. Why would I?" But every word he spoke only made me more certain that what I was about to do wasn't just justified, it was necessary. I had already delivered the documentation to the victim's legal team, already confirmed that the dash cam had captured more than enough to tie him directly to the incident, and already made sure that my own name was clean, insulated, and fully backed by the kind of airtight legal protection Chloe was known for building. Now all that was left was to give him one final push, the kind that would land just hard enough to knock the last of his arrogance off balance and send him tumbling headfirst into the consequences he had so casually sidestepped for most of his adult life. So when he asked to borrow the car again, I didn't hesitate, not because I trusted him, and certainly not because I believed he needed it for something legitimate, but because I knew, without a doubt, that one more ride in that car would be the last favor I'd ever do for him. He came to pick it up on a Thursday afternoon, grinning like we were back in high school and he was borrowing it for a date. He slapped the hood, made a joke about not hitting any more parked cars, and winked like we were in on something together, like we were still some kind of team. I handed him the keys and said, "Just be careful. Wouldn't want to get pulled over." What he didn't know was that I had already called a friend who worked in local enforcement and tipped them off, not about the hit and run specifically, not yet, but about the fact that a man with a suspended license, no insurance, and a history of reckless driving was currently operating a vehicle registered in someone else's name. I didn't need them to arrest him. I just needed them to pull him over. I needed an official record of his violation that couldn't be erased with charm, excuses, or family forgiveness. Sure enough, about 2 hours later, I got the call not from Ryan, but from the impound lot. My vehicle had been seized after a traffic stop on the west side of town. The officer who called was polite, said I wasn't in any trouble, just that my car had been involved in a traffic incident and that I could pick it up the next day. When I asked if there had been any arrests, she said that the driver had been issued a citation and released on site, and that I should make sure he didn't operate the vehicle again. I thanked her, hung up, and waited. 3 hours after that, Ryan called. He didn't start with an apology. He started with a complaint. Said the cop was some rookie asshole who had it out for him. Said he wasn't even speeding, just driving while not rich, and how unfair it was that people like him always got hassled. I let him vent, didn't interrupt, didn't offer sympathy, and when he finally asked if I could go with him the next day to get the car out of impound, I said sure, but I had a few things to take care of first. The next morning, he didn't call. The morning after that, I got a voicemail from my insurance company again. But this time, it wasn't a warning about an accident. It was a statement of notice. They had received official documentation that the driver of my vehicle had been cited and that, due to the repeat incidents associated with my car, my premium would be increasing significantly unless I could prove that the vehicle was no longer being operated by unauthorized drivers. I knew exactly what that meant. Ryan, once again, had given my name to the authorities, claimed I was driving the car, or worse, claimed he was using it with my full blessing in order to distance himself from the legal consequences of driving without a valid license. In his mind, the solution was simple: let Jessica take the heat. Let Jessica make a few calls. Let Jessica clean up the mess. That had always worked before. But this time, I didn't return the call. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I went quiet. And when people like Ryan notice silence, they get nervous, because silence means control, and control is something he never learned how to deal with unless it was in his hands. So when the lawsuit papers arrived at his apartment the following Monday, delivered by courier, addressed to his full name, with my signature clearly displayed on the witness statement he didn't know I'd written, he didn't call me right away. He stormed into my house, red-faced, shaking, holding the envelope like it had personally betrayed him. "You're suing me," he said, his voice pitched high with disbelief, as though the idea of me choosing accountability over blood was somehow unnatural. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "No, Ryan. I'm not suing you. The couple you hit is. I just told the truth." He stared at me, slack-jawed, as if that word, truth, was some foreign concept he couldn't quite grasp. And I didn't give him time to argue, because there was nothing left to say. The trap had closed, and all I had to do was watch him realize that it was never me he should have feared. It was his own reflection in the mess he thought he could walk away from. There's a peculiar kind of silence that settles into the air when someone finally realizes they've run out of exits, the kind that arrives not with shouting or violence or drama, but with the soft, undeniable weight of truth. Truth that has been circling for weeks like a vulture, waiting for the right moment to descend, and now, at last, has landed in the middle of the room with a weight that cannot be ignored, excused, or laughed off. That was the silence Ryan stood in when he barged into my house, the lawsuit papers clutched in one shaking hand like they might explode if he opened them again, his mouth moving faster than his mind could catch up, spitting fragments of disbelief and accusation, desperately trying to make sense of the fact that I, of all people, had finally done the one thing he never saw coming. I had turned the mirror back onto him and forced him to face the wreckage he had so carefully crafted and so carelessly walked away from. He didn't ask how I could do this, not at first. He demanded to know why. As if I owed him an explanation, as if decades of excuses and cover-ups and half-hearted apologies had earned him immunity from accountability. His voice was frantic, too loud for the room, filled with that mix of ego and panic that only surfaces when someone who's always been one step ahead suddenly realizes there are no more steps, only the ledge. He threw the papers down on my kitchen counter, my clean, quiet, well-kept kitchen that he'd walked into so many times without knocking, without thinking, without ever once treating it like a place that belonged to someone else. And he pointed at the signature line like it was a knife. "What the hell is this, Jess?" he snapped, his voice cracking in a way that would have sounded pitiful if it hadn't been so infuriating. "You're seriously going to let them come after me like this? You gave them my name? You gave them the damn footage? Are you trying to ruin my life?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have words, but because I wanted him to feel it, the full weight of the silence I'd been living in while he went on pretending everything was fine. I wanted him to look around the room and see what it looked like when someone who'd been quiet for too long finally decided to speak with actions instead of warnings. So I walked to the counter slowly, picked up the envelope he'd thrown down like it was beneath him, and gently placed it back in his hands. "I didn't ruin your life, Ryan," I said, my voice low but steady, the kind of steady that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even if it hurts. "You did that all by yourself. All I did was stop pretending I didn't see it happening." He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, but then he stopped, because for the first time, there was nothing he could say that would undo what was already done. The statement was signed, notarized, and submitted. The dashcam footage had been reviewed and authenticated. The victim's legal team had everything they needed to proceed with both the civil suit and the criminal complaint, and I had made sure, through Chloe, through carefully drafted statements, through every damn document I'd kept, that my name was clean and that Ryan's lies were finally chained to his name, not mine. He tried to pivot like he always did. He reached for sentiment, for guilt, for the fragile little threads of childhood that he thought still connected us. He brought up our mother, said she'd be devastated, said she wouldn't understand why I was doing this, said I was tearing the family apart. And I just stared at him. Not with anger, not even with pity, but with this deep, exhausted clarity that comes only when you've spent enough nights replaying the same arguments in your head and finally realize that some people aren't sorry. They're just sorry they got caught. "You lied to my face, Ryan," I said, more for myself than for him. "You used my car, hit someone, drove away like they didn't matter, and then you tried to make it my problem. You gambled with my name, my record, and my trust, and you lost. And now you want sympathy." He stepped back, shoulders sagging like the weight of it all had just landed fully on them for the first time, and I saw it, just for a moment, that flicker of understanding behind his eyes. That maybe, just maybe, he'd never thought I'd have the strength to do what he had always assumed I wouldn't. But that flicker died quickly, smothered by his pride, because men like Ryan don't apologize. They deflect, they spin, and when all else fails, they beg you to remember the version of them you once loved, even if that version hasn't existed in years. Jess, he said quietly now, voice stripped of all performance, we're family. And I nodded. We were. He didn't stay long after that. He left the papers on the table, walked out without another word, and didn't slam the door, which, strangely, made the moment feel heavier than if he had. And as I stood there, alone in that same kitchen where he dropped lie after lie like crumbs he expected me to clean up, I felt that silence return. But this time, it wasn't sharp. It wasn't tense. It was peaceful. In the days that followed, the lawsuit progressed faster than I'd expected. The victim's attorney, a woman named Gwendolyn with a voice like iron wrapped in velvet, kept me informed at every turn, and Chloe made sure every interaction I had with the process was clean, direct, and insulated. There was a hearing scheduled. Subpoenas were issued. The footage, the data, the documents, they weren't just evidence anymore. They were a story, one Ryan couldn't rewrite. I didn't go out of my way to tell her mother what had happened. I knew she'd find out eventually. Ryan would make sure of that. He'd spin it in his favor, paint me as cruel, ungrateful, vindictive, and she'd believe just enough of it to be disappointed in me, but not enough to hold him accountable. That was always the way. But for once, I was okay with that. Because this wasn't about clearing my name with the family. It was about finally protecting myself from the person who had done more damage under the guise of brotherhood than any stranger ever could. And in the quiet aftermath, when the papers were filed, when the car was finally back in my possession, when the insurance company confirmed they'd removed Ryan from all liability under my policy, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, and thought about all the times I'd chosen silence to keep the peace, all the times I'd covered for him because it felt easier than confronting the truth. I thought about how he looked when he read that statement. Not shocked. Not betrayed. Just stunned. As if for the first time in his life, someone had taken away his script. And I wondered, truly wondered, if he would ever understand that it wasn't revenge that drove me to do it. It was survival. Because sometimes, protecting yourself isn't about building walls or cutting ties or screaming until someone hears you. Sometimes it's about waiting patiently, collecting the truth, and delivering it, without apology, in a manila envelope that arrives on a Monday morning with your signature at the bottom. And sometimes, the cleanest break is the one that never gets stitched back together.